along those same lines, what does it mean to be kosher?
Kosher is the way an animal is killed. A kosher animal has to be slit with a flint knife. It has to be done with a flint knife, and the neck is severed from ear to ear like that, so that it's a painless death. It just more or less falls asleep, and then they catch that blood, and they wait till all the blood is drained out. So kosher means being drained of the blood, because in the blood is the life, and they believe very firmly on that. And then when they would slaughter the animals in the old days, they would take that cup of blood and splatter it on the altar, on the 4 points of the altar, because that was life.
What are the 4
Life.
points?
The 4 points of the altar. The altar has 4 points. In fact, if a Jew was running away and ran into the temple and grabbed a corner of the altar, he could not be taken. That was like asylum. He would run in and grab the corner of the altar. He was safe there. For how long, who knows, until he decided to go and eat or something, then they could grab him. But yeah, it was kind of like an asylum.
So I'm sure that the whole idea of kosher has evolved, and because now we have kosher pickles and kosher this and kosher that. What is that all about? What does that mean?
Well, a lot of it is just name.
Or blessing, maybe?
No, I don't think it has anything to do with the blessing. It's in how it's prepared. And you don't mix eggs with meat. You don't mix dairy and meat together, poultry. It all has to be separated. You don't use shellfish. They never eat shellfish or anything with a cloven hoof. They would never eat horse meat or pigs. Of course, pork is taboo. But look what happened with the Catholics. For a long time, they couldn't eat meat on Friday. They always ate fish. That's gone, by the way. They used to face the altar toward the wall. The priest always talked this way. Now he turns around and talks this way. So those changes are bound to happen in all religions, and people just have to be aware of them and accept them, because it's the changing times. Unless you reform your own religion, it'll die. Reformation is important. That's why the Reformation was so important back at Luther's time, because so many abuses were going on, indulgences, people buying their way into heaven, so to speak, and the priest charging for prayers and for confessions, and it was making a mockery of what it was all about. Luther could see that. But of course they tried to kill him because of it. And plus the fact that the Protestants put the priest out of work. Because the people didn't need an intermediary anymore. They could talk. That's the whole Protestant faith, is that you have your own hotline to God. You don't need a priest to go through. Right. That's what makes them different.
And Martin Luther advocated reading for yourself also.
Yes, well, he couldn't do that until the printing press, Gutenberg's printing press. Once that came out, that was one of the first things they did, was the Gutenberg Bible, so that people could read it. But not many people could afford that. They had to wait till it was more affordable, and they could start making, they had movable type, then they could make more of them.
Okay. You talked about the influence of Babylonian culture on the Hebrews. What influence did Greek culture, moving ahead in history, what influence did the Greek culture have on Hebrew culture?
Oh, a great deal, because in around 333, when Alexander the Great came in and took over, everything had to become Greek. Everyone had to learn not only speaking Greek, of course that would be called Hellenistic. The Hellenistic theory was Greek dress, Greek language, Greek architecture, Greek, everything the culture envisioned, the reading, everything. Everybody spoke Greek. You had to learn it. It was the language of commerce. And he owned so much of it, he took over the whole area around the Mediterranean. So everyone around the Mediterranean could speak Greek. But that was a great thing, because then people could communicate. And when people came through Israel, they spoke Greek down here, they came up here, they could communicate, they could bring their stories, and they could understand each other. Before that, they didn't. It was impossible.
So language primarily.
Language.
How about stories?
Yeah, the stories, well, I don't think they changed much, except the biggest thing that happened was in 265 BCE, the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek. That changed a lot of things. And that's because the Hebrews who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, insisted on it because it was a Greek language. So they said, hey, we speak Greek down here, we don't read Hebrew. So we want our Torah translated into the Greek language so we can read it. And that's what the Septuagint is all about.
It's a translation of the Torah into Greek.
Into Greek, yes.
So it sounds like the Greek culture was a lot more tolerant of the Hebrews than the Romans were later on.
Oh, they were, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the symbolism behind the Star of David?
The Star of David. It's a six-pointed star, but it's actually two triangles. There's one upside down and the other goes to the point. People read it like this, they think it goes like that, but it doesn't. It's two triangles. And if you start with the top triangle, that's God. That point is God. Over here is Torah. This corner triangle is man. God, Torah, man. Then you look at the other three, and you go down to the bottom, which is creation. Creation and God are opposite of each other. Torah and man are opposite of each other. You go from creation to prophets to revelation. So prophets and revelation are opposite. God and creation are opposite. Man and Torah are opposite.
Okay, so the man and Torah connection is the law.
That's right.
They're trying to reinforce that that's the law.
Yes.
Okay. And
Torah actually means teachings.
Okay. And I can see the connection between God and creation,
Yes.
but the one between prophets and what was the other one?
Revelation.
Revelation?
Prophecy and revelation go together.
Okay, can you
Revelation is-
elaborate on that?
I'm sorry?
Elaborate on that?
Well, Revelation, I'm not saying the book of Revelation,
Oh, I see, okay.
just Revelation itself, the revealing.
Okay.
The word for truth
Mhm.
is aletheia, and it means unveiling. If you pull the veil apart from something, something is revealed, revelation.
Hmm.
That's what the apocalypse is all about. Apo means away from, calypso means covering. If you take the covering away, apocalypse. That's what Revelation is. That's the book of Revelation called it. That's why it's called the apocalypse, because it reveals. So prophecy and revelation go together.
Mm-hmm.
One is the outcome of the other.
Okay. Well, let's move now more into early Christian history. What can you tell me about Paul, and particularly, he seemed to have a lot of rules, and he would write letters to these communities, and he would go and visit these communities, and he set up a lot of rules for Christian faith. Were these his ideas?
No, because in the book of Corinthians he says, I am handing over to you what was handed to me, which tells us that he must have picked up a tradition that was already rampant in the area. And what most people don't realize is that Paul wrote before the Gospels. Because you look in the New Testament, you see all the Gospels and then the letters of Paul, and you assume he comes later. It's not so, because he wrote his letters between 45 and 55. And the first Gospel didn't come along until about 67, which would have been the book of Mark. And all Mark did was borrow ideas that were already out there. And most scholars believe there's a Q source, which is called Quelle, which means source or where from. It's German. And they believe that there was something circulating that had all the stories and teachings of Jesus. Because somebody had either made a record of them or passed them around orally, because they're in all synoptic gospels. And why would they all be the same when they wrote 10, 20 years apart? So they must have been stories they all shared.
And that was Quella?
Quelle, Q-U-E-L-L-E.
That's interesting. So that's speculation though, yes? They haven't.
No, that's not speculation, because they can pick up on it. Scholars have gone into scripture and they can find traces of it, especially in the book of John, because John is actually called the book of signs because there are actual signs in there. The first sign, the second sign, the third sign. First one is the wine at Cana, the second sign is, one of them is Lazarus coming. And they can pinpoint these things and say, aha, that came from a specific source. He didn't make those up. That's what was happening at the time, but somebody must have made a record of it. either mentally or written down.
Hmm.
No, they can pull it together and see that it was.
Okay.